For decades, Bigfoot footage has been plagued by blurry cameras and questionable authenticity, leaving skeptics to dismiss every sighting as elaborate hoaxes. Today, we examine crystal-clear recordings, so undeniably authentic that they've forced even the harshest critics to reconsider what's actually lurking in our forests. Footage so sharp and compelling that it will forever change how you view the wilderness around you. In 2014, Mary Greeley was doing her usual thing, filming around Yellowstone for her YouTube channel. She focused on seismic stuff and weird happenings near the park. One March morning, snow was everywhere in the Upper Geyser Basin, and she had her camera rolling to document the changing conditions. Then something incredible happened. About half a mile away across a ridge, two figures showed up. At first glance, you might think of wildlife, but the way they walked upright immediately ruled that out. The footage captures these bipedal beings taking massive steps, each one covering nearly 6 feet. How does that compare to a human stride of about 2.5 feet? And doesn't that suggest something isn't right here? Park rangers had measured the snow depth at over 3 feet, yet these figures moved like it was nothing. Their movement was smooth and powerful, effortless even. Analysis put their height somewhere between 8 and 9 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms that seemed unusually long. When you go frame by frame, the footage shows a heel-to-toe stride that's consistent with primates, definitely not humans trudging through snow in winter gear. Biologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell pointed out that bears simply cannot walk on 2 legs for that kind of distance, and elk or bison silhouettes would look completely different. Human visitors would also avoid that kind of deep, unmarked terrain entirely. Thermal analysis suggested both figures were giving off substantial heat, exactly what you'd expect from large, warm-blooded creatures. Halfway through the video, the beings stopped and turned toward the camera, almost like they knew they were being watched. After several seconds, they retreated into the tree line with startling speed and vanished from view. The whole encounter lasted just under 4 minutes. The clarity, stable camera work, and environmental context have made this one of the most analyzed cryptid recordings ever captured. Park officials stay neutral on the matter, though some rangers privately admit they've heard similar reports. Greeley herself maintains her reaction was completely genuine. She was capturing a mystery she never intended to find. But if Yellowstone showed us these towering figures moving through snow at a distance, the Washington pictures brought that same presence right up close. What once seemed like shadows on a ridge was now staring directly through a cabin window. A cabin sits in the forests of Washington State, about 45 miles southeast of Olympic National Park. And for weeks leading up to this encounter, the place had been plagued by weird disturbances. Motion lights going off for no reason, heavy knocks echoing through the night, even electrical issues that made no sense. The owner started to suspect something was circling his property after dark, watching, waiting. So on October 14, 2012, he set up a night vision camera aimed right at the window. The photograph it captured has been picked apart by enthusiasts and experts ever since. It shows this towering figure, roughly 8 feet tall, pressed right up against the glass. Thick, dark hair covers this muscular frame, with shoulders that span nearly 4 feet across. Beneath all that hair, you can see the chest and torso revealing this human-like musculature that's both fascinating and terrifying. But it's the face that makes this encounter so absolutely striking. You're looking at this combination of human and ape-like features framed by long hair with these deep-set eyes reflecting the camera's infrared glow. The eyes aren't just wandering around aimlessly either. They're focused, scanning with this awareness that sends chills down your spine. The figure tilts its head slightly, observing the interior with this unnerving intent. Analysts have noted the natural musculature and hair patterns, details that would be nearly impossible to fake convincingly. Those long arms extending beyond human proportions align perfectly with Bigfoot descriptions from the Pacific Northwest. Doesn't the image appear anatomically consistent with the creature's posture and body proportions matching those of a primate evolved for forest life? On October 3, 2019, 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez disappeared from Cascade Falls Campground in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, Washington. What started as a family camping trip turned into the most documented Bigfoot encounter in Pacific Northwest history, captured entirely on her father's GoPro camera. The footage would later reveal a truth so extraordinary that it challenges everything we thought we knew about the wilderness. Emma Rodriguez was an adventurous third grader from Bellingham, Washington, who loved exploring the outdoors with her family. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a 34-year-old park ranger who had worked in the Mount Baker area for over 8 years. Her mother, Sarah, taught elementary school and shared Miguel's passion for hiking and camping. The family made monthly trips to various locations throughout the Cascades, always choosing remote spots where Emma could safely explore and learn about nature. October 3rd was supposed to be a perfect autumn camping trip. The Rodriguez family had reserved campsite 14 at Cascade Falls, a secluded spot about 12 miles from the nearest road. Miguel had chosen this location specifically because it offered excellent hiking trails suitable for Emma's age, plus a beautiful waterfall that she had been asking to see for months. The weather forecast called for clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal conditions for their planned 3-day adventure. What Miguel didn't know was that this particular area had a history of unexplained incidents. Park records, which he had never reviewed for this remote section, documented 5 missing person cases over the past 15 years. 3 involved children under the age of 12. All had occurred during the fall months, and none had ever been fully resolved. The family arrived at Cascade Falls Campground at 2:30 p.m. on October 3, 2019. Miguel's routine was always the same: set up camp first, then explore. He had mounted his GoPro Hero 7 on a chest harness that morning, planning to document their entire trip for Emma's school project about Pacific Northwest ecosystems. The camera would run continuously throughout their stay, capturing what would become the most important footage in cryptozoology history. Emma was immediately fascinated by the campground's natural features. The site sat in a clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks, with Cascade Creek running just 50 yards away. The sound of the waterfall, about a quarter-mile upstream, created a constant background noise that Emma found magical. She spent the first hour collecting interesting rocks and leaves, while Miguel and Sarah set up their tent and organized their supplies. At 4:15 p.m., the GoPro captured Emma discovering something unusual near the creek. She called out to her parents, pointing excitedly at what appeared to be a large footprint pressed into the muddy bank. Miguel, with his ranger training, immediately recognized that it was unlike any animal track he had seen in his 8 years of forest service. The print measured roughly 14 inches long and 6 inches wide, with clearly defined toe impressions that suggested a bipedal creature. "Dad, what kind of animal makes tracks like this?" Emma asked, her voice clearly audible on the recording. Miguel's response revealed his confusion. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. It's bigger than a bear track, but the shape is all wrong. Maybe it's just an old print that got distorted by the rain." But Emma wasn't satisfied with that explanation. Her natural curiosity, encouraged by years of family hiking trips, made her want to investigate further. The GoPro footage shows her following the creek bank, looking for more prints while her parents finished setting up camp. What she found would change everything. At 4:32 p.m., Emma discovered a series of prints leading away from the creek and into the dense forest. The tracks were fresh, pressed into soft earth that had been moistened by morning dew, but not yet dried by the afternoon sun. More importantly, they showed a clear pattern of bipedal movement with a stride length that suggested something much larger than a human, but walking upright like one. "Mom! Dad! Come look at this!" Emma's excited voice echoed through the forest. The camera captured Miguel and Sarah hurrying to join their daughter, who was kneeling beside the clearest print they had seen yet. Sarah's background in education made her naturally analytical, and she immediately began asking questions that would prove crucial later. "How deep do you think this is, Miguel?" she asked, running her finger along the edge of the impression. "And look at these toe marks. They're so detailed. This had to be made recently, maybe even today." Miguel's ranger instincts kicked in. He began documenting the prints with his phone camera while the GPORE continued recording from his chest. The footage shows him measuring the prints with a small ruler from Emma's school supplies, noting the depth, width, and spacing between tracks. His professional training was evident as he carefully avoided disturbing the evidence while gathering as much information as possible. What happened next would haunt the Rodriguez family forever. At 4:47 p.m., while Miguel and Sarah were focused on documenting the footprints, Emma wandered about 30 yards deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be a faint trail. The GoPro, still mounted on Miguel's chest, captured her small figure moving between the trees, her bright red jacket making her easy to spot against the dark forest backdrop. "Emma, don't go too far," Sarah called out, but her daughter was already partially hidden by the thick undergrowth. The camera shows Emma stopping beside a massive fallen log, examining something on the ground that had caught her attention. She appeared to be talking to herself, a habit she had when making discoveries during their family hikes. At exactly 4:52 p.m., the GoPro recorded a sound that would later be analyzed by an endless amount of audio experts around the world. A low, resonant call echoed through the forest, not quite human, but far more complex than any known animal vocalization. The sound lasted approximately 8 seconds and seemed to come from multiple directions at once, suggesting either multiple sources or sophisticated acoustic manipulation. Emma's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of showing fear, she displayed the curiosity that her parents had always encouraged. The footage shows her turning toward the sound, taking several steps in its direction. "Hello?" she called out, her young voice carrying clearly through the forest. "Is someone there?" Miguel and Sarah heard both the strange call and Emma's response. The camera captured their immediate alarm as they realized their daughter was no longer visible from their position. "Emma!" Miguel shouted, his voice tight with sudden concern. "Come back here right now." But Emma didn't respond. The GoPro footage shows Miguel and Sarah crashing through the undergrowth, calling their daughter's name repeatedly. They reached the fallen log where Emma had been standing just moments before, but she was nowhere to be seen. Her small footprints were clearly visible in the soft earth, leading toward a dense thicket of salmonberry bushes and young firs. What the camera captured next defied explanation. As Miguel pushed through the thicket, following Emma's trail, a massive dark shape moved between the trees about 50 yards ahead. The figure was upright, easily 8 feet tall, and moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Most remarkably, it appeared to be carrying something, a small bundle that could have been a child. "Sarah, do you see that?" Miguel's voice was barely a whisper, but the camera's sensitive microphone picked up every word. The footage shows him stopping abruptly, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Sarah moved up beside him, and her sharp intake of breath was clearly audible when she spotted the figure. The creature, for lack of a better term, seemed aware of their presence. It paused at the edge of a small clearing, turning slightly in their direction. The GoPro captured what appeared to be a face, though the distance and forest shadows made details difficult to discern. What was clear was the intelligence in its posture, the deliberate way it assessed the situation before continuing deeper into the forest. The figure disappeared into the dense forest, moving with surprising speed despite its size and apparent burden. Miguel and Sarah gave chase, but the thick undergrowth and uneven terrain made it impossible to keep up. The GoPro footage became chaotic, showing glimpses of trees, sky, and forest floor as Miguel struggled through the wilderness. For the next 47 minutes, the camera documented their frantic search. They called Emma's name continuously, their voices growing hoarse with desperation. They found broken branches and disturbed vegetation that suggested something large had passed through, but no sign of their daughter. As daylight began to fade, Miguel made the decision that would save their lives, but haunt them forever. "We need to get help," he told Sarah, his voice heavy with defeat. "We can't search this forest in the dark, and we need professional rescue teams." The hike back to their campsite took 23 minutes, every step captured by the still-running GoPro. The footage shows their growing desperation as they realized how vast and impenetrable the forest truly was. By the time they reached their tent, it was nearly dark, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Miguel's first call was to his supervisor at the Park Service, Ranger Captain Lisa Chen. The GoPro captured his side of the conversation, his professional training warring with his parental panic as he tried to explain what had happened. "Lisa, I need immediate search and rescue at Cascade Falls Campground. My daughter is missing, and I think something took her." Captain Chen's response was swift and professional. Within 2 hours, the first search teams arrived at the campground. The initial response included 12 rangers, 2 dog units, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging equipment. The search would eventually expand to include over 60 personnel and cover more than 40 square miles of wilderness. But the most crucial evidence was already in Miguel's possession. The GoPro footage, which he initially forgot about in his panic, would provide investigators with the most detailed documentation of a Bigfoot encounter ever recorded. When he finally remembered the camera the next morning, the implications of what they had captured began to sink in. Detective Ray Morrison of the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office was assigned as the lead investigator for Emma's disappearance. A 20-year veteran with extensive experience in wilderness search and rescue, Morrison had seen his share of missing person cases. But when Miguel showed him the GoPro footage, Morrison knew he was dealing with something unprecedented. "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like this," Morrison later testified. The footage clearly shows a large, bipedal creature carrying what appears to be a child. The movement patterns, the size, the apparent intelligence, it doesn't match any known animal in the Pacific Northwest. The investigation that followed was unlike any missing person case in Washington state history. Traditional search methods were combined with cryptozoology research, audio analysis, and behavioral studies. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted, though their involvement was kept confidential to avoid media sensationalism. Dr. Amanda Foster, a primatologist from the University of Washington, was brought in to analyze the creature footage. Her initial assessment was cautious but intriguing. The locomotion patterns suggest a large primate, but the size and proportions don't match any known species. The way it carries the burden, presumably the child, shows remarkable care and intelligence. Audio expert Dr. James Whitfield analyzed the vocalizations captured on the GPORO. His findings were equally puzzling. The calls demonstrate a vocal range and complexity that exceeds human capabilities while showing structured patterns that suggest intentional communication. There are harmonic frequencies that don't occur in any cataloged North American wildlife. The search for Emma continued for 2 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers and professional searchers. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the forest. Ground teams with dogs covered every accessible trail and creek bed. The effort was one of the largest wilderness searches in Pacific Northwest history. On October 17th, 14 days after Emma's disappearance, hiker Jennifer Walsh made a discovery that would change everything. While exploring a remote area about 8 miles from the original campsite, she found a small clearing that showed signs of recent habitation. The site included a crude shelter made from branches and moss, a circle of stones that had been used for a fire, and most importantly, Emma's red jacket hanging from a low branch. The jacket was clean and undamaged, carefully placed as if someone had wanted it to be found. Nearby, investigators discovered more of the large footprints, along with smaller impressions that could have been made by a child's bare feet. The evidence suggested that Emma had been in this location recently, and that she had been cared for rather than harmed. But the most extraordinary discovery came from a motion-activated trail cam that Jennifer had set up in the area 6 months earlier for a wildlife photography project. The camera had captured footage from the night of October 16th, just 1 day before the jacket was found. The trail camera footage showed Emma Rodriguez, very much alive, sitting beside a small fire in the clearing. She appeared healthy and unharmed, though her clothes were dirty and her hair was tangled. Most remarkably, she was not alone. The massive figure from Miguel's GoPro footage was clearly visible, sitting across the fire from Emma in what appeared to be a protective posture. The creature's features were more visible in the trail camera footage than they had been in the original GoPro recording. It was clearly humanoid but covered in dark, coarse hair. Its face showed intelligence and what could only be described as gentleness as it watched Emma. The footage captured the creature offering Emma what appeared to be berries and roots, which she accepted and ate without fear. Perhaps most incredible was the apparent communication between Emma and her captor. The audio captured Emma talking to the creature in her normal voice, as if having a conversation with a friend. While the creature's responses were not in any recognizable language, they showed clear patterns and seemed to be direct replies to Emma's comments. "I miss my mom and dad." Emma's voice was clearly audible on the recording. "When can I go home?" The creature's response was a series of low, melodic sounds that seemed almost mournful. It reached out with one massive hand and gently touched Emma's shoulder in what appeared to be a comforting gesture. The trail camera footage ran for 37 minutes before the subjects moved out of frame. The final images showed the creature carefully banking the fire and leading Emma deeper into the forest, its hand protectively on her shoulder. This discovery prompted an immediate expansion of the search effort. The area around Jennifer's clearing became the focus of intensive investigation, with teams of searchers combing every square foot of the surrounding forest. But despite their efforts, no further trace of Emma or her mysterious companion was found. The case took another dramatic turn on October 23rd when Emma Rodriguez walked out of the forest on her own. She appeared at the Cascade Falls trailhead at approximately 6:30 a.m., dirty and tired, but otherwise unharmed. Hikers who found her described her as calm and coherent, asking only to see her parents. Emma's reunion with Miguel and Sarah was captured by news cameras that had been maintaining a vigil at the search headquarters. The footage shows a healthy, alert child who seemed remarkably untraumatized by her 3-week ordeal in the wilderness. Her first words to her parents were, "I'm okay. He took good care of me." The medical examination that followed found Emma to be in surprisingly good health. She had lost some weight and showed signs of exposure to the elements, but had no injuries or indications of abuse. Most remarkably, she had somehow avoided the hypothermia and dehydration that would normally be expected after 3 weeks in the wilderness. Emma's account of her experience was both fascinating and troubling. She described being carried through the forest by what she called the big man, who had taken her to a safe place where she wouldn't get lost. According to Emma, the creature had provided her with food, water, and shelter, protecting her from the cold and rain. "He was really nice," Emma told investigators. "He couldn't talk like us, but he understood when I was scared or hungry. He showed me which berries were safe to eat and how to stay warm at night. He missed his family too." Child psychologist Dr. Maria Santos, who conducted extensive interviews with Emma, found no evidence of trauma or fabrication. Emma's account is remarkably consistent and detailed. She shows no signs of the psychological distress typically associated with abduction or abuse. Her descriptions of the creature's behavior suggest a level of care and protection that's difficult to explain. Perhaps most intriguing were Emma's drawings of her experience. Her artwork showed detailed depictions of the creature, the forest shelters where they stayed, and various scenes from their time together. The drawings matched the physical evidence found at the campsites and corroborated details from the trail camera footage. Emma also provided information that led to the discovery of 2 additional campsites where she and the creature had stayed during her time in the forest. Both sites showed the same careful construction and evidence of fire use, along with more of the large footprints. The sites were connected by what appeared to be a network of trails known only to the creature. The scientific community's response to Emma's case was divided but intense. Cryptozoologists hailed it as definitive proof of Bigfoot's existence, pointing to the multiple forms of evidence: video footage, audio recordings, physical tracks, and eyewitness testimony from a credible source. Skeptics argued that the case, while extraordinary, still fell short of the scientific proof required to confirm a new species. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University and a leading Bigfoot researcher, analyzed all the available evidence. His conclusion was cautiously optimistic. The Rodriguez case presents the most compelling collection of evidence for the existence of a large, unknown primate in North America. The combination of video documentation, physical evidence, and witness testimony creates a picture that is difficult to dismiss through conventional explanations. The physical evidence collected during Emma's disappearance underwent extensive scientific analysis. Hair samples found at the campsites were examined by Dr. Melba Ketchum's laboratory in Texas, known for its work on cryptid DNA analysis. The results were inconclusive but intriguing. The samples showed primate characteristics but didn't match any known species in genetic databases. Plaster casts of the footprints revealed dermal ridges and anatomical details that would be nearly impossible to fake. The prints showed wear patterns consistent with a creature that walked primarily on forest terrain, with calloused areas that suggested a lifetime of barefoot travel through rough wilderness. The audio analysis proved equally compelling. Dr. Scott Nelson, a former Navy cryptologic linguist, studied the vocalizations captured on both Miguel's GoPro and the trail camera. His findings suggested a complex communication system with consistent phonetic patterns that resembled language structure. What we're hearing isn't random animal sounds, Dr. Nelson explained. There are repeated phonemes, tonal variations that suggest meaning, and response patterns that indicate genuine communication. This creature appears to have a sophisticated vocal language. Emma's case also revealed a disturbing pattern of similar incidents throughout the Pacific Northwest. Research conducted by the Olympic Project, a Bigfoot investigation organization, uncovered 17 cases of missing children in Washington and Oregon over the past 30 years. In 12 of these cases, the children were found alive after several days, often with stories of being cared for by a big, hairy man in the forest. Most of these earlier cases had been dismissed as childhood fantasy or trauma-induced false memories. But Emma's case, with its extensive documentation, forced investigators to reconsider these previous incidents. Patterns emerged that were too consistent to ignore. Children between ages 6 and 10, disappearances during fall months, recovery after 3 to 7 days, and remarkably similar descriptions of their caretaker. The Rodriguez family's life changed dramatically after Emma's return. Miguel took extended leave from his ranger position, struggling to reconcile his scientific training with what he had witnessed. Sarah left her teaching job to focus on Emma's recovery and to research similar cases. The family moved to a smaller town away from the media attention, seeking privacy to process their extraordinary experience. Emma herself seemed remarkably well-adjusted, though she occasionally spoke about missing her friend in the forest. Child psychologists noted that she showed none of the typical signs of trauma associated with abduction cases. Instead, she displayed increased confidence and a deeper connection to nature that surprised her parents. "She's different now," Sarah explained to investigators. "More mature, more aware of the natural world around her. It's like she learned something out there that most people never get to experience." The case attracted international attention from researchers, media outlets, and cryptozoology enthusiasts. The Rodriguez family received thousands of letters from people sharing their own encounters with similar creatures. Many of these accounts had never been reported to authorities, their witnesses fearing ridicule or disbelief. Dr. Grover Krantz's research archives at Washington State University became a focal point for analyzing these reports. Patterns emerged showing a concentration of sightings in the same general area where Emma disappeared, suggesting a stable population of these creatures in the remote wilderness of the North Cascades. The Native American perspective added crucial context to Emma's case. Elder Joseph Moses of the Lummi Nation explained that his people had always known about the Stick Indians, forest beings who occasionally interacted with humans, particularly children. According to tribal tradition, these encounters were not to be feared, but respected as connections to the ancient wisdom of the forest. "The old stories tell us that sometimes the forest people take care of lost children," Moses shared. "They return them when it's safe, when they've learned what they needed to learn." Your daughter was chosen for something special. The investigation officially concluded 6 months after Emma's return, with the case classified as resolved but unexplained. Detective Morrison's final report acknowledged that while Emma had been safely returned, the circumstances of her disappearance and care remained beyond conventional explanation. The physical evidence was preserved in a special collection at the University of Washington, available for future research. The GoPro footage and trail camera recordings were digitally archived and made available to qualified researchers worldwide. Emma's case sparked changes in how missing person investigations are conducted in wilderness areas. Search protocols now include consultation with cryptozoology researchers and Native American tribal authorities. Trail cameras are deployed more extensively, and unusual evidence is preserved rather than dismissed. 5 years later, Emma Rodriguez is now 13 years old and thriving in her new community. She has become an advocate for wilderness conservation and frequently speaks about the importance of respecting unknown species that may share our forests. Her experience has inspired a new generation of researchers dedicated to understanding the mysteries that still exist in our world. The Rodriguez family established the Emma Rodriguez Foundation for Wilderness Research, which funds scientific investigation of unexplained phenomena in natural settings. The foundation has supported dozens of research projects and maintains a database of similar encounters reported throughout North America. Miguel returned to ranger work, but in a different capacity, serving as a liaison between park services and cryptozoology researchers. His experience has helped bridge the gap between traditional wildlife management and the investigation of unknown species. The creature that cared for Emma has never been seen again, despite extensive monitoring of the area where she was found. Motion-activated cameras continue to operate throughout the region, and researchers maintain hope that additional evidence will emerge. Emma's case remains one of the most documented and credible Bigfoot encounters in history. The combination of video evidence, physical traces, and credible witness testimony has convinced many skeptics that something extraordinary exists in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Whether that something is a surviving population of ancient primates, an unknown species of human relative, or something else entirely, remains to be determined. But Emma Rodriguez's 3 weeks in the forest proved that our world still holds mysteries that challenge our understanding of what's possible. The truth about what happened to 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez may never be fully understood, But her safe return and the evidence of her care by an unknown forest dweller suggests that sometimes, in the deepest wilderness, we are not as alone as we think. And sometimes that's not something to fear, but something to wonder about. Paul Freeman was a seasoned outdoorsman with serious experience in tracking and wildlife observation. He'd been intrigued by the elusive Sasquatch for years. On August 20th, 1992, while following a series of massive tracks near Deduct Spring, Freeman spotted this large, bipedal figure moving through the underbrush. With his camera ready, he documented the creature's movements, capturing footage that would become a cornerstone of cryptozoological study. The footage reveals a creature approximately 7 feet tall, covered in dark, shaggy hair, moving with this fluid, rolling gait that suggests a completely non-human anatomy. Its proportions, particularly the length of its arms and the width of its shoulders, differ significantly from those of a human. Could those physical traits really belong to a person in disguise, or do they point to something far beyond human fabrication? This led researchers to conclude that the creature isn't just a human in a costume, but a distinct species entirely. Nearby, Freeman documented footprints measuring 17 inches in length, with distinct toe spread and depth indicating a creature of significant size and weight. These prints, along with the video evidence, have been analyzed by experts who argue that the anatomical details visible in the footage support its authenticity. The Freeman footage has had a massive impact on Bigfoot research, inspiring numerous expeditions, documentaries, and scientific analyses. Its clarity and the detailed account provided by Freeman have made it a focal point in Bigfoot studies, fueling debates and discussions about the existence of Sasquatch. For Freeman, this encounter was way more than just a chance sighting. It was a profound moment that combined physical evidence with unexplained phenomena. The creature's behavior and presence suggested intelligence and awareness, challenging assumptions about Sasquatch behavior and its place in the natural world. Far beyond the West Coast. In 2006, while hiking along a rarely used game trail, Rick Jacobs spotted movement at the edge of a clearing about 150 yards away. Expecting to see deer or maybe a bear, he raised his camera and froze. What he captured was absolutely stunning. The photograph shows a massive bipedal figure standing partially hidden behind trees. This thing had to be 7 to 8 feet tall with incredibly broad shoulders, a muscular torso, and long dark hair covering its body. Everything about it matched the classic Sasquatch descriptions witnesses have been reporting for decades. The creature stood upright with a deliberate posture, seemingly aware of Jacobs, but not running away. The clarity of that outline, especially the shoulder width and arm proportions, was unlike anything you'd see from known wildlife or a human silhouette. Cryptozoology experts have gone over this photo with a fine-tooth comb. They point to anatomical features that just don't add up to a person in a costume. The slope of those shoulders, the length of the arms compared to the torso, the shape of the head, none of it matches human proportions. What makes it even more compelling is the setting itself. The forest floor looks completely undisturbed, and there's no human infrastructure anywhere nearby, suggesting this creature's presence was completely natural, rather than some elaborate hoax. Skeptics argue that it might have been a person partially concealed by the thick foliage. But supporters point to the photograph's composition, combined with Jacobs's rock-solid testimony, as evidence this is the real deal. What makes this discovery so significant isn't just the documentation itself, but the questions it raises about Bigfoot distribution and behavior throughout the eastern United States. Does this expand the entire conversation beyond the Pacific Northwest into forests long considered unlikely habitats for these creatures? The Jacobs photo froze a towering shape between the trees, and years later, another lens on a lonely highway would catch a figure just as briefly and just as unsettling. February 4th, 2019, rural Maine. At 3:04 a.m., a roadside traffic camera activated by icy conditions captured something extraordinary on a desolate stretch of highway glazed with frost. For a brief moment at the very edge of the frame, a massive figure stepped into view. Its outline was distorted by the camera's grainy night vision, but the proportions were unmistakable. Shoulders far broader than any human's, with arms swinging low as it moved along the tree line. The figure never crossed fully into the lane. Instead, it lingered at the boundary between pavement and woods, pacing slowly, as if testing the open space. Just before the camera cycled to its next angle, the shape retreated into darkness, leaving only a faint blur of movement behind. When the footage was later reviewed, investigators noted that the figure's brief presence was enough to trigger the system's motion detection. No vehicles were present, no wildlife was recorded, and yet the camera logged an anomaly standing close to 8 feet tall. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed a consistent gait across 4 steps, with the head and shoulders maintaining a level height despite uneven ground. A detail many argue rules out a large quadruped such as a moose or elk. Skeptics counter that the figure's appearance is too brief to draw firm conclusions. Some claim the distorted outline was caused by infrared glare reflecting off ice-coated branches, creating the illusion of a walking shape. Others suggest a person in winter gear wandering near the tree line, though the scale compared to nearby road markers appears to contradict that explanation. Supporters point to one frame in particular. As the figure pivots, light from the roadside sign briefly illuminates what looks like a long arm extending well past the waist. Combined with the pacing stride and upright posture, they argue this is consistent with other documented sightings, and not with any known local wildlife. What do you think could explain this mysterious encounter on that frozen Maine highway? Rush hour in Anchorage, Alaska in 2005. Commuters crawling through city streets with those snow-dusted peaks and the massive Chugach Mountains towering in the distance. This went down near the Seward Highway, along a stretch bordered by forested hills and wetlands that flow into Potter Marsh, a protected area packed with moose, coyotes, and tons of migratory birds. From the tree line right next to the road, this massive upright figure just suddenly appeared. Witnesses described something roughly 7 to 8 feet tall, covered head to toe in thick dark hair, with arms way longer than they should be and a stride that just ate up the pavement. In just a few steps, this thing crossed both lanes in seconds. Several drivers said it was as big as a small pickup truck, with shoulders broader than any human could possibly have. On October 31, 2012, up in the rugged slopes of Provo Canyon, Utah, a hiker was recording the usual scenery during an afternoon trek. Just a routine outing among the pines, scrub brush, and rocky slopes. The sun was getting low, throwing long shadows across the trail, and you could hear distant water from the canyon creek, adding to that peaceful backdrop. The hiker was focused on capturing those fall colors, but as he panned across a clearing near the trail, something unusual showed up between the trees. This large, upright figure emerged briefly from the shadows. The figure towered over the brush, built thick through the chest with arms that swung low as it moved. For several seconds, it seemed to be watching the trail before quickly retreating into the thick undergrowth. It was over in a flash, and the hiker kept filming, completely unaware of what had just crossed into his frame. It wasn't until later, during careful review, that the size and proportions of this figure became obvious. The way it moved suggested anatomy, unlike any known wildlife in the canyon. When the tape was reviewed, observers noted how the body build and movement failed to line up with any local wildlife. What really stood out was that it was caught in a place people actually use, on an ordinary camera with no setup or staging. That made the clip feel less like performance and more like someone stumbling onto something they were never supposed to see. Could something that large really move through such a well-traveled area without anyone else noticing? For cryptid enthusiasts and locals alike, it proved that these creatures, if they're real, can move through trails and open spaces while staying largely unnoticed, blending into their environment, yet leaving undeniable signs they exist. Out in Idaho's backcountry in January of 2025, an ATV rider caught something on camera that hasn't been easy for anyone to dismiss. The footage begins with the rider weaving down a narrow trail, engine noise blending with the snap of branches and the echo of winter silence. Then the camera jolts sideways and locks onto a shape moving through the trees. Upright, heavy, covered in dark hair. Its stride isn't frantic, it's steady, balanced, like it knows exactly where it's going. The proportions hit you immediately, arms swinging low, shoulders built like a wall. Whatever this is, it's built for power. Instead of fading into the endless pile of shaky clips, this encounter keeps resurfacing. Not because of hype, but because every frame raises more questions. Watch closely and you'll see the head turn toward the camera, the body adjusting course, as if aware of being observed. The rider's own voice on the recording slips from curiosity to fear in real time. That shift is hard to fake. For the rider, this wasn't just a story to tell later, it felt like an intrusion into something he wasn't supposed to see. The sheer size, the deliberate movement, carried a weight that went beyond chance. Whatever was in those trees wasn't just surviving out there. Was it watching? Someone filming an ordinary stretch of swampland in southern Florida ended up capturing a figure in motion, upright and deliberate, unlike anything local wildlife accounts could explain. This wasn't some quick glimpse or muddy footprints. This was a living, breathing creature moving through its territory with purpose. Cryptozoologist Dave Shealy recorded this back in the early 2000s during an expedition into a remote section of Everglades marshland. From his small airboat, Shealy's camera followed a dark, upright figure stepping carefully through knee-deep water, weaving between cypress knees and thick mangroves. What caught everyone's attention was its size, roughly 7 feet tall with massive shoulders and long limbs. The anatomical details really got experts talking. Those hands and feet showed dexterity and length that just don't match up with bears. The skull shape hinted at a pronounced sagittal crest. This thing would pause, shift its weight, scan the surroundings like it knew of other presence, then continue silently deeper into the vegetation. But if it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a person, then what exactly was walking out there in the swamp? Analysts pointed out how the figure's proportions, the way it walked, how it interacted with the swamp environment. None of it matched known species. Some suggested it could be a juvenile or small adult of an unknown hominid. Skeptics warned that swamp perspective and all that vegetation might be playing tricks with size. The footage became the center of heated debate when Shealy shared selected clips. Without seeing the full recording, skeptics wrote it off as misidentification or a hoax. Supporters argued this offered the clearest look at the skunk ape yet, pointing to the combination of movement, scale, and how well it adapted to the environment. The video starts in September of 2015, with the family talking casually as they walk along a narrow trail. Then suddenly, the camera swings toward a figure moving fast through the brush. This thing walks on 2 legs, covered in dark hair. It could be simply another primate or a man in a ghillie suit, but researchers who've studied this footage say we're looking at something completely different. The family found footprints nearby, and the toe spread, the depth. Everything pointed to a creature with serious size and weight behind it. Experts who've analyzed these prints alongside the video footage argue that the anatomical details you can see support this being the real deal. Online, the footage has split people down the middle. Believers say the shaky off-center framing proves it's authentic, too raw and clumsy to be staged. Skeptics fire back that the timing is too neat, that someone in a suit could have been planted just off the trail, waiting for the camera to swing. Others argue the prints could have been carved or pressed in by hand, while defenders point out the depth and stride are far beyond what a hoaxer could fake without heavy equipment. This Oregon Bigfoot footage hasn't faded into the background the way most clips do. What makes it stick is the rawness. The figure isn't just passing through the frame, it seems to be tracking the family. When slowed down, its head clearly turns toward the camera. The arms swing deliberate, the stride unnervingly steady despite the uneven ground. The family's reactions are genuine panic, not scripted fear. Every frame suggests an intelligence behind those movements, something aware and watching. After debunking decades of Sasquatch claims, David Paulides finally reveals the most convincing Bigfoot footage ever. Frame by frame, he found himself confronting evidence so impossible that it would force authorities to expose what they've been hiding. David's investigation began in Northern California, in areas where Bigfoot sightings had been reported for generations. Rather than chasing fresh reports or setting up cameras hoping to capture footage, the approach was methodical. Interview witnesses, gather physical evidence, look for patterns, apply the same investigative techniques used in criminal cases to a mystery that had frustrated researchers for decades. Could the truth be found not in proving existence, but in understanding nature? What emerged from thousands of interviews and field investigations was a picture far more complex than anyone anticipated. The physical evidence was there, plenty of it, but alongside all that tangible proof were reports of phenomena that didn't fit any known biological model. Creatures that seemed to vanish in open terrain, encounters accompanied by strange lights and unexplainable sensations, behavior that suggested intelligence far beyond what an undiscovered primate should possess. Footprints discovered across North America, from California to Washington, from Minnesota to Oklahoma, show consistent anatomical features that appear in casts taken by different people in different decades. These aren't crude impressions that could be carved out of wood and stamped in mud. They show dermal ridges, the equivalent of fingerprints on the soles of feet. They demonstrate a mid-tarsal break, a flexibility in the middle of the foot that humans don't possess, but that would be biomechanically advantageous for a heavy creature moving through rough terrain. Forensic podiatrists who've examined these casts can't explain them away as hoaxes. The complexity is simply too great, creating fake dermal ridges that follow anatomically correct patterns that appear slightly different in each print, the way real fingerprints vary, that show pressure variations consistent with weight distribution during walking. That level of sophisticated forgery would be nearly impossible. And for what purpose? Most of these prints are found in remote locations where no one would see them unless specifically searching. Paul Freeman, a ranger working in the middle of nowhere by himself, stumbled across unusual tracks that started and stopped sometimes in the middle of nowhere. He carried his camera around, hoping to catch something, though he wasn't even sure what. And this is where one of the most famous footage was caught, when he finally captured video evidence of a Bigfoot-like creature, complete with a child being picked up at the end. The world dismissed it. Yet the footage came from an era before digitalization, when such manipulation was effectively impossible. Freeman wasn't a wealthy man. He couldn't have hoaxed it. How could such evidence simply be ignored? Aside from visuals, the vocalizations are equally compelling. Audio recordings from the Sierra Nevada mountains, captured in the 1970s by Ron Moorhead and his companions, have been analyzed by sound engineers and linguistics experts. These recordings, known as the Sierra Sounds, aren't recordings of known animals. They're not humans attempting to hoax. The frequency ranges exceed what human vocal cords can produce. The patterns show structure that suggests language, actual communication with grammar and meaning. Then there's the physical evidence of strength. Massive trees found broken or twisted at heights 10 to 15 feet off the ground in ways that don't match wind or ice damage. Boulders moved that would require multiple people or machinery. Structures built from logs that would take teams of men to manipulate. Whatever is creating these effects possesses strength far beyond human capability. Could this be dismissed as natural phenomena? Here's where things become complicated. For every piece of solid, measurable evidence, there's a report that makes no biological sense. And these aren't rare anomalies that can be dismissed as mistakes or misidentifications. They're consistent patterns that appear again and again in witness testimony from credible observers who have nothing to gain from fabricating stories. According to Paulides, park rangers, People who work in the wilderness every day, who understand sightlines and terrain, who know what animals can and can't do, describe encounters where massive creatures vanish between trees in terrain where there's nowhere to hide. The being is visible one moment, impossible to miss given its size, and simply gone the next. Not running away, not ducking behind cover, just no longer there. These are trained observers reporting something that shouldn't be possible. Barb Choupet's footage captured in her own backyard showed similar impossibilities. She heard something walking on the gravel and noticed her dogs crying under the porch. What caught her attention next defied explanation. She could hear the screen door open, saw the doorknob turning. What she was looking at was covered entirely in hair. The smell was overwhelming, like a dead animal. When investigators examined the area, they found a 17-inch track in the creek bed nearby, right where she'd indicated. The footage she captured matched patterns seen in Scott Carpenter's research, validating one account with another. But what was most disturbing wasn't what was captured on film, but what happened after. The sense that these beings choose when to appear and when to vanish. Now it's easy to dismiss footage as hoax, but what if researchers chimed in with their DNA expertise? Over the course of several years, David Paulides and his team collected samples alleged to be from these creatures for genetic testing. Hair that didn't match known species, biological material from sites where encounters occurred, anything that might provide definitive proof of what these beings actually are. Finding a laboratory willing to test the samples proved nearly impossible. UC Davis, UC Berkeley, all the major labs refused to touch it when they discovered it was Bigfoot related. The only person willing to conduct the analysis was Dr. Melba Ketchum, a geneticist who had testified in Texas courts and put people on death row based on her DNA testimony. When people questioned her expertise, Paulides had a simple challenge: find a bigger expert who can testify in court. They wouldn't find one. When the DNA analysis came back, it showed something nobody expected. The mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited only from the mother, came back completely human. Not similar to human, not close to human, but identical to modern human mitochondrial DNA. Genetic markers suggested this maternal lineage originated in the Middle East approximately 12 to 15,000 years ago, the same genetic heritage that can be traced in human populations today. But the nuclear DNA, which is inherited from both parents, told a different story. The sequences didn't match anything in genetic databases. Not human, not any known primate, not any cataloged species. The analysis suggested the presence of DNA from an unknown source, something that should theoretically be impossible. Every creature on Earth has ancestors. Every species has evolutionary relatives. Finding DNA that doesn't match any known organism in 34 trillion base pairs in GenBank raises profound questions. Mainstream geneticists argued contamination, suggesting that human DNA got mixed into samples during collection or testing. They pointed to methodological concerns and the fact that the study wasn't published in major peer-reviewed journals. For many scientists, the results were interesting but ultimately inconclusive, more likely to reflect problems with the testing process than evidence of an unknown species. But Paulides interpreted the data differently. If the maternal line is human, but the paternal line is something unknown, what does that imply? The hypothesis suggested that these creatures might represent a hybrid, the result of an unknown hominid species interbreeding with humans thousands of years ago. It would explain their human-like appearance, their obvious intelligence, and their ability to remain hidden despite being so large and apparently widespread. Critics claimed the DNA was contaminated, but Paulides had a simple response to this argument. Let's pretend contamination occurred in the worst possible way. Let's pretend someone grabbed the hair sample, rolled it between their hands, rubbed it on their face, and contaminated it thoroughly. The lab would still cleanse it, and even if contamination remained, what would the testing reveal? On the maternal side, you'd find the contaminator's mother's DNA. On the fraternal side, you'd find the contaminator's father's DNA. To find nothing on the fraternal side, to find DNA that matches nothing in any database, is literally impossible through contamination. That's never happened before. When researcher L.A. Marzulli studied elongated skulls in South America and conducted DNA testing, he encountered the same phenomenon, unknown nuclear DNA. He knew it. He had been saying from day one that when nuclear DNA was found, there'd be nothing in the genbank to match it. The maternal DNA traced to the Middle East raised even more eyebrows, particularly among those familiar with religious texts. Could these beings somehow be connected to ancient accounts? Could they be what old texts referred to as the Nephilim, the giants that once walked the earth? Scott Carpenter, a researcher who worked closely with Paulides, believed they were. He called them the beasts of the earth, referenced in ancient traditions, and the DNA evidence seemed to support historical accounts of giants whose bones were supposedly collected by museums like the Smithsonian. Bones that today the Smithsonian claims never existed. This presents a fundamental challenge to the ape hypothesis. Gorillas are intelligent. Chimpanzees use tools and have complex social structures. Orangutans demonstrate problem-solving abilities that rival human children, but no ape developed spoken language in the wild. The cognitive architecture required for language, the specific neural pathways and brain structures, evolved in humans and our direct ancestors. If these creatures possess genuine language, they're not just unusually smart animals. They're something fundamentally different from any known primate. The behavior demonstrates strategic intelligence applied to avoiding detection. These beings understand human technology. They avoid trail cameras with remarkable consistency. They stay out of clear lines of sight. They seem to understand when they're being observed or tracked. This isn't animal cunning. This is intelligence comparable to, or possibly exceeding human intelligence, deployed specifically to remain hidden. One wildlife biologist conducting field research observed behavior that stunned him. He was watching a clear-cut area through binoculars, observing a massive figure crossing approximately 200 yards away. The figure stood well over 7 feet tall and moved with a distinctive gait. He had a clear view for several seconds. He blinked, adjusted his grip on the binoculars, and when he looked again, the figure had vanished. The clear cut stretched for a quarter mile in every direction, with nowhere to hide. Whatever he'd been watching had disappeared from open ground in the span of a second. The sensation of being watched is almost universal in encounter reports. Not the vague unease of being in dark woods, but an overwhelming, focused awareness that something intelligent is observing. People describe it as feeling eyes on them, a physical sensation that makes neck hair stand up and triggers every primitive warning system humans possess. But when they turn to look, there's nothing visible, just that persistent sense of being studied by something hidden, something patient, something that chooses when and whether to reveal itself. Multiple hunters report experiencing what they describe as time distortions during encounters. A hunter tracking a deer saw a large figure ahead and froze, trying to decide whether to retreat or investigate. From his perspective, he stood there for perhaps 10 seconds before backing away, slowly. But when he checked his watch later, he'd lost 45 minutes. He has no memory of that time, no sense of anything unusual happening, just a gap where time should have been. Other hunters report similar experiences, losing anywhere from minutes to hours with no recollection of what occurred. During the filming of one documentary, the videographer and sound technician, experienced professionals who'd worked countless shoots, were absolutely stunned when 3 cameras went down simultaneously and 3 different lavalier microphones failed at the same time. They said that they've heard about this, but they can't believe they experienced it. It goes toward the evidence that in areas where Bigfoot is present, electronics behave impossibly. In one interview captured in the film, a paramedic described encountering a Bigfoot that crossed in front of their emergency vehicle, and everything in their rig shut down, every piece of electronic equipment going dark simultaneously. These people are credible professionals reporting something that defies conventional understanding. Over time, Paulides finally started listening to Native American accounts, and a very different picture emerged. Tribal elders don't speak of these beings as animals. They describe them as people, another tribe that lives according to different rules. The indigenous languages have specific names for them, not the generic Bigfoot coined by modern society, but terms that translate more closely to old people, or forest people, or the tall ones. Without the advancements of cameras, traditions passed down through generations, the knowledge that these beings have language, culture, social structures, and laws. They live in family groups, care for their young, and maintain territories. Some tribal accounts describe them as the original inhabitants, the first people who lived on the land before modern humans arrived. Other traditions say they came from the stars, descending to Earth in ancient times and choosing to live in deep forests away from human civilization. The descriptions consistently emphasize human-like qualities rather than animal characteristics. They're intelligent and aware, capable of choosing when and how to interact with people. Some tribes describe them as generally peaceful but protective of their territories, avoiding humans when possible but capable of asserting themselves when necessary. The protocols for encountering them involve respect and appropriate behavior, treating them as one would treat people from another culture, not as wild animals to be feared or hunted. Historical records support these accounts. Journals and letters from settlers in the 1800s include references to indigenous people speaking of hairy giants in the mountains. One particularly detailed account from a rancher in Northern California describes Native Americans bringing food to a creature living in nearby cliffs, treating it with respect and care. The rancher asked elders about it and was told the creature was a kind of person, different from them, but deserving of consideration and protection. These tribal perspectives align with evidence that modern investigators find puzzling. If the creatures possess language, if they demonstrate intelligence and cultural behaviors, if they're capable of complex decision-making and social organization, then treating them as undiscovered apes fundamentally misunderstands what they are. The indigenous communities have been saying this for centuries. Perhaps it's time researchers started taking that knowledge seriously. Over the years, Freedom of Information requests and interviews with former government personnel have revealed something disturbing. Official agencies, from the National Park Service to the Forest Service to military installations, have documented encounters but never made them public. Reports exist in archives that the general public doesn't access. Rangers have been told to redirect questions about unusual sightings. Military personnel stationed in remote areas have been debriefed about encounters and instructed not to discuss them. One document Paulides obtained through persistent requests describes an incident at a secure facility in the Pacific Northwest. Multiple personnel reported seeing a large bipedal figure moving along the perimeter fence. Security footage captured something, but was classified and removed from standard records. The official explanation was that nothing unusual occurred, but employees who were present insist otherwise, describing a creature that stood at least 8 feet tall and moved with obvious intelligence, studying the facility's layout as if assessing defenses. Why would government agencies suppress or downplay these encounters? Several theories exist. Perhaps they genuinely don't know what the creatures are and don't want to create public panic about an unexplained phenomenon. Maybe they're concerned about the impact on public lands if people became afraid to visit national parks and forests. Or possibly they know more than they're admitting, and disclosure would raise questions about why information has been withheld for decades. Former personnel occasionally speak out after retirement, describing encounters during their service and the official responses. The pattern is consistent. Acknowledge the event internally, document it, and then minimize or deny it in any public forum. This isn't conspiracy theory speculation. These are documented cases with paper trails and multiple witnesses. Something is being observed in government-controlled areas, and the official position remains that nothing unusual is happening. The disconnect between private knowledge and public statements raises obvious questions. Jonathan Dover, a Navajo ranger, provided perhaps the most credible insider perspective according to Paulides. During his time with the Rangers, his primary job at some point became investigating Bigfoot and UFOs, He came across as such a credible individual that it's hard not to believe everything he says. He even worked at Skinwalker Ranch, where he brought drummers with him during one investigation. They were watching boulders at a distance, and those drums heated up the boulders in a way that made no rational sense. It was a turning point that made researchers think that maybe sound, maybe rhythm, maybe there's something to all this that needed further investigation. Among the most perplexing patterns in encounter reports are descriptions of unusual lights. Witnesses describe seeing orbs or spheres of light in areas where encounters occur, sometimes before seeing a creature, sometimes during an encounter, sometimes after. These aren't distant lights that could be explained as aircraft or astronomical objects. They're described as glowing spheres at ground level or floating through trees, moving in ways that seem purposeful and controlled. Paulides noted that one researcher captured video footage showing a brief flash of reddish light that coincided exactly with a deep grunting vocalization. The light appeared and disappeared in a fraction of a second, but frame-by-frame analysis showed it corresponded precisely with the sound. Every attempt to explain it as lens flare or passing insects failed. The color, intensity, and timing didn't match any conventional explanation. It remained a mystery, one more piece of evidence that didn't fit expected patterns. Other reports describe larger light phenomena. Witnesses talk about shimmering areas that look like heat distortion or the visual effect when looking through water. These distortions appear in forest clearings or along tree lines, with figures sometimes visible within or emerging from them. Some witnesses describe the distortions as looking like doorways or windows, rectangular areas where the air itself seems different. Creatures are reported stepping through these areas and vanishing, or appearing from them as if entering from somewhere else. At locations known for unusual activity, certain areas of Native American reservations or specific wilderness regions, witnesses report seeing both creatures and light phenomena occurring together. Videos exist showing thermal signatures of large bipedal figures in proximity to unexplained light sources. Are these separate mysteries happening in the same locations by coincidence? Or is there an actual connection? Could these creatures somehow be associated with, or even traveling through, the light phenomena that witnesses describe? After years of accumulating evidence, after thousands of interviews and countless hours analyzing reports, Paulides identified a pattern that traditional researchers had been ignoring. In a significant number of encounters, witnesses describe seeing creatures appear or disappear in ways that suggest they're not simply moving through normal space. They seem to be stepping into or out of areas where the air looks different, where reality itself appears distorted. One account from a rancher describes watching through binoculars as a large figure walked toward a shimmering area in a meadow. The shimmer looked like heat distortion, but the day was cool and overcast. The figure appeared to pause at the edge of this distortion, then stepped into it and vanished. Not walked behind something, not moved out of sight, but disappeared as if stepping through a doorway into somewhere else. The rancher watched the area for another 20 minutes. The shimmer remained visible for a few minutes and then faded away. This theory explains several persistent mysteries. How do creatures weighing hundreds of pounds move through forests without leaving tracks? They don't always move through normal space. Why do footprint trails begin and end impossibly? Because the creatures aren't walking the entire distance. How do they disappear from open terrain where there's nowhere to hide? They're not hiding. They're leaving through means that don't involve normal movement. One of the most consistently reported and most troubling patterns involves footprints that begin or end impossibly. A couple hiking in national parkland discovered a set of massive tracks crossing a snow-covered meadow. The prints were clear and deep, showing the weight of whatever made them. They followed the trail, photographing the tracks, measuring the stride length. The prints continued across the meadow in a straight line, and then simply stopped. No final print showing a jump or leap. No disturbance suggesting the creature climbed a tree. The tracks just ended in the middle of open snow with no explanation. Rangers in multiple states report similar discoveries. Tracks that appear in the middle of fields or clearings with no trail leading to the first print. Footprints that show up in fresh snow on Forest Service roads, continuing for 50 or 100 yards, and then terminating without explanation. In some cases, the prints end at the base of a tree, but inspection shows no bark disturbance, no scratches or marks suggesting anything climbed up. The tracks simply stop, as if whatever made them cease to exist at that point. Even more disturbing are reports of tracks that seem to disappear while being followed. A researcher tracking prints through fresh snow described seeing them clearly ahead, following carefully to preserve the evidence. When looking down at the trail already covered, the prints behind were fading, becoming shallower and less distinct, eventually disappearing entirely. Another investigator reported photographing a clear footprint, marking its location, and returning hours later to find the print gone, not filled in by wind or weather, but smoothed over as if it had never existed. However, when discussing the most convincing Bigfoot footage in history, Paulides said that one film still stands above all others: the Patterson-Gimlin footage from 1967 at Bluff Creek, California, as cliché as it may sound. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, two old rodeo cowboys, captured something on film that has never been debunked despite decades of scrutiny. The subject moves naturally, with muscle and limb movement inconsistent with human anatomy. The stride length exceeds human norms. The behavior suggests awareness and intelligence. The footage shows what appears to be a female Bigfoot, nicknamed Patty, walking across a creek bed. When she turns to look at the camera, the moment is remarkable. The being is aware she's being filmed. She makes a choice to look, to acknowledge the observers, and then to continue on her way. The musculature visible in the film, the way the muscles move beneath the hair, the proportions of the limbs. Forensic analysis has confirmed these details are consistent with a real creature, not a person in a suit. Paul Freeman's footage from the 1990s shows remarkable similarities. The gleam that comes off the creature in Freeman's film matches the gleam coming off Patty in the Patterson-Gimlin footage. Freeman captured something that, if it had emerged today in the age of digital manipulation, would be immediately dismissed. But because it happened before digitalization, there's no way it was faked using modern techniques. The footage even shows a child being picked up by Bigfoot at the end, a detail Freeman didn't even notice at the time. These pieces of film footage, combined with the physical evidence, the DNA results, the witness testimony, and the anomalous phenomena, create a picture that's impossible to ignore. Something is out there, something real. But what the footage really captures isn't just a creature. It's evidence of a phenomenon that exists at the boundaries of current understanding. After nearly 2 decades of investigation, thousands of interviews, analysis of physical evidence from across North America, and careful consideration of reports that seemed impossible, David Paulides reached conclusions on these footages that make many people uncomfortable. Bigfoot is real, not probably real, not possibly real, but definitely real based on the accumulated weight of evidence. But understanding what Bigfoot actually is requires setting aside simple explanations and confronting a phenomenon that's far stranger than most researchers want to acknowledge. The investigation continues. More footage evidence emerges every year. More witnesses come forward with experiences that follow the same patterns. More researchers take the phenomenon seriously and contribute their expertise to understanding it. Slowly, gradually, the picture becomes clearer. Not clear enough yet for definitive answers, but clear enough to know that something real, something intelligent, something that exists at the edge of human understanding is out there. Patterson and Gimlin were both experienced outdoorsmen, riding horseback along the east bank of Bluff Creek on October 20th, 1967, when they spotted this large bipedal figure moving through the underbrush. With his camera ready, Patterson documented the creature's movements, capturing footage that would become the cornerstone of cryptozoological study. The film that followed became legendary. The subject, broad, heavy-set, and moving at a pace that dwarfed human stride, turned its head once toward the camera before continuing into the tree line. The proportions alone drew attention, long arms swinging freely, musculature shifting beneath the hair, and a gait smoother than expected under rough footing. In the sandbar mud, Patterson and Gimlin later measured prints about 16 inches long, the toes clearly defined, and the depth of the impressions suggesting an immense weight. These tracks, paired with the footage, would fuel decades of debate. September 15, 2025. Deep in the remote wilderness of British Columbia, wildlife photographer Marcus Chen deployed his quadcopter drone for what should have been a routine elk population survey. Instead, his camera captured a fleeting figure moving upright between the cedars, massive, dark, and far too tall to be mistaken for a bear. For only a few seconds, the drone's feed showed its shoulders slipping through the trees before the figure disappeared beneath the canopy. As seen in the footage, Chen adjusted altitude, circling the area in search of whatever he had seen. The drone's camera swept across moss-draped branches and shadowed undergrowth, but the clearing remained empty. Then, just at the edge of the frame, something sudden and fast closed in from the periphery. A heavy object, likely a stone, struck the drone with force. The camera jolted violently, static filled the feed, and within seconds, the aircraft spiraled down. The last frame showed blurred forest rushing upward before the image cut to black. When the footage surfaced online, reaction was immediate. Some viewers insisted the strike confirmed intelligence, arguing no animal throws objects with intent. Others dismissed it as staged, pointing out how easy it is to simulate impact with editing tricks. Chen, however, released the drone's telemetry logs, showing abrupt mechanical failure immediately after the collision. Experts weighed in with cautious observations. A primatologist noted that great apes in the wild occasionally hurl stones at perceived threats, suggesting the act, if genuine, was consistent with higher-level cognition. A drone engineer confirmed the strike was external, not mechanical, but declined to speculate further. Could an unknown species really possess the awareness to target technology so precisely? In the forests of British Columbia, the camera was silenced mid-flight. In Alaska, the storm itself carried out the same erasure, leaving only the suggestion of a figure against the snow. For less than a minute, the weather station's feed in Denali National Park, Alaska, showed a figure moving against the wind on the 7th of January, 2025. Pale hair contrasted faintly against the whiteout, and its outline was unmistakably humanoid. Then a gust swept through, covering the lens in blowing powder and rendering the image useless. When the view cleared seconds later, the space where the figure had been was empty. Online debate was immediate following the day the footage was shared. Some insisted that it showed nothing more than drifting snow distorted by low resolution, while others argued the shape was too consistent, the signature broad shoulders, swinging arms, and a stride that cut through waist-deep drifts without faltering. A handful of commenters claiming to be experts dismissed it as pareidolia, the psychological tendency to perceive familiar patterns, while self-described video analysts countered that the feed bore no signs of editing and carried authentic depth blur from the storm itself. But could a being adapted to these brutal conditions have remained hidden for this long? Believers pointed out that the brevity of the sighting made fakery less likely, noting that hoaxes usually exaggerate and linger. Skeptics replied that its very shortness made it useless as evidence. What both sides found striking was the timing. An automated camera running in an uninhabited stretch of parkland, catching only seconds of something it was never designed to record. Alaska's camera recorded only a few seconds before the figure moved out of frame, leaving the frozen landscape eerily still. Meanwhile, in Oregon, the campground footage caught something crossing the tree line with a stride too fast, too deliberate, and far too large to ignore. In Oregon, a popular campground near the base of the Cascades had gone quiet for the night, save for the muffled conversation between two campers sharing a tent-side drink. During that 16th night of May this year, one of their phones was already out filming the campfire for a social media post. Then, something shifted at the edge of the tree line. The clip shows less than 10 seconds of motion. A tall shape crosses between two pines, the stride oddly smooth and upright. A faint reflection from the phone's light glints for a moment, then the figure disappears into shadow, leaving only the sound of crackling wood. Almost immediately, online viewers questioned the authenticity. The timing struck many as too convenient. A phone already recording, the subject framed neatly in view, and the sighting taking place in a campground, notorious for Bigfoot tourism. Several commenters pointed out that the proportions looked suspiciously like a man in padded clothing, the exaggerated swing of the arms resembling costume design more than natural movement. And yet, a smaller group argued otherwise. They noted the way the silhouette seemed to maintain balance on uneven ground, its outline bulkier than any ordinary camper. A few self-identified wildlife experts chimed in, claiming that while the footage was poor quality, the shoulder width and gait did not match a human frame. If it was staged, why keep it so brief? Barely long enough to process before it was gone. Skeptics countered that very brevity could be part of the trick. Grainy, dark footage leaves room for suggestion, and hoaxes thrive on what cannot be clearly seen. One alleged video analyst insisted the clip was textbook low-light manipulation, adding that the lack of additional angles or follow-up made it more of a curiosity than evidence. The campers described the moment afterwards as unsettling in its silence. There was no crashing, no obvious animal movement, only the impression of something that appeared just long enough to be noticed before fading back into the trees. The location only fueled debate further. The Cascades have a long history of claimed sightings, drawing tourists, researchers, and hoaxers alike. Some online threads dismiss the video outright as part of that culture, a prank meant to go viral in a familiar setting. Others held on to the idea that hoaxes usually overplay their hand, while this one left only questions. That night, it slipped silently across a campground, barely seen. Now, months later, it crossed a game trail in the dark, moving with the same unnerving purpose before disappearing without a trace. July 6, 2025. Near the tree line of Mount Hood, Oregon, a pair of hunters had set up a trail camera aimed at a game path known for elk movement. At 3:14 a.m., the camera triggered. For just 6 seconds, the infrared feed recorded something upright moving through the frame. The figure passed behind thin branches, its outline clear enough to show long arms hanging lower than expected. The head tilted once toward the camera, and for 2 frames, a single eye reflected white in the infrared. The stride was fast but heavy, each step carrying it further across the shot than a human would cover. The legs bent deeply, almost exaggerated, before straightening again. Then it was gone. Only the empty path remained, brush moving where it had passed. When the footage appeared online, defenders immediately pushed back against claims of fakery. They argued the eye glint couldn't have been staged, pointing out that a taped reflector or flashlight would have bounced light differently under infrared. Others highlighted how the figure's steps didn't match human stride length, noting that each pace covered far too much ground for someone in boots. What stood out most in the debate was the movement itself, smooth, steady, and unwavering, without the awkward pauses people expect when someone is faking. Commenters emphasized how the branches in the foreground distorted the outline just slightly, something they claimed would be nearly impossible to replicate with CGI or a suit. Others pointed out the timing, a random trail camera in the middle of the night catching a figure that doesn't linger, doesn't perform for the lens, and vanishes in seconds. For many, those small details made the clip feel less like a prank and more like an accidental glimpse of something not meant to be seen. The Georgetown Loop is this heritage narrow-gauge railway that's been running between Georgetown and Silver Plume since the 1880s. It carries riders through some seriously rugged terrain at elevations over 8,400 feet. On that September afternoon in 2025, Brian's snapping photos of golden aspens, dark pines, rocky outcrops, the usual mountain stuff. Later, when he's going through his shots, a friend notices something weird. There's this towering figure, partially hidden behind a pine tree, and it looks like it's watching the train. The image starts spreading online and draws interest from cryptid researchers pretty quickly. Analysts are noting the subject's apparent height of 8 to 9 feet, with this domed head that resembles what they call a sagittal crest. The body proportions don't match humans at all. We're talking broad shoulders, barrel chest, and these unusually long arms. Experts confirmed there are no statues or displays along that stretch of track, which cuts through remote sections of the Arapaho National Forest. That's a million-acre wilderness home to bears, elk, and moose. But officials note that none of those animals match the silhouette in this photograph. Digital imaging specialists went over this thing and found no signs of alteration. The lighting, grain, and shadows were all consistent across the photo. Scale analysis using nearby trees estimated a height between 8.5 and 9.5 feet. The figure's position, hidden yet observing, suggested intent rather than just random chance. Was this the deliberate presence of something watching from cover? Brian, by all accounts, reacted with genuine surprise, not like someone trying to promote themselves. He actually sought verification, contacted the railroad, and allowed experts to review the image. The accidental nature of the capture, combined with daylight clarity and ideal habitat, has led some people to call this one of the most compelling Bigfoot photographs yet, though skeptics remain unconvinced, of course. When Brian Phillips parked at the Farley's Prairie Trailhead in Ocala National Forest around 2 p.m., planning a simple 4-mile loop through the pine flatwoods. The temperature sat at 73 degrees, and the forest was unusually quiet. He had covered roughly 1.5 miles when he noticed something moving through the palmetto scrub approximately 200 feet ahead. His first assumption was a black bear, common in this part of the forest. Black bears were frequently sighted in Ocala National Forest, especially during spring when they emerged from their winter dens. He stopped walking and reached for his phone, more out of excitement than concern. The figure moved between 2 longleaf pines, and Brian activated his camera. Through the screen, he watched as the shape emerged into a small clearing. It was walking upright. The stride was too long, the proportions completely wrong for a human. The shoulders were massive, easily 3 feet across. Brian estimated the height at around 7.5 feet, though the uneven terrain made precision difficult. Dark brown hair covered the entire body, matted and thick. It moved with purpose, not the shambling gait of a bear on its hind legs. Bears could walk upright for short distances, but their movement was clumsy, unstable. This was different. Each step looked natural, balanced, as if walking on 2 legs was its primary mode of movement. Brian kept the phone steady, trying to capture as much detail as possible. The creature moved through dappled sunlight, filtering through the pine canopy. In the brighter patches, the hair appeared lighter, almost reddish-brown. In the shadows, it looked nearly black. The head sat directly on the shoulders with almost no visible neck. When the creature turned slightly, Brian could see the profile. The forehead sloped back sharply from the pronounced brow. The jaw jutted forward. It was not a bear. It was not a person. Brian's recording shows 47 seconds of this initial sighting. The creature moved from left to right across the clearing, never looking in his direction. Its arms swung naturally at its sides, longer than human arms, reaching past where the knees would be. The legs were thick and powerful, each step covering nearly 4 feet of ground. When it reached the far tree line, it paused. The head turned slightly, profile visible for just 3 seconds. The face showed a pronounced brow ridge and a flat nose. Then it disappeared into the dense understory. Every instinct told Brian to return to his vehicle. The parking area was less than 2 miles back. He could be there in 30 minutes at a quick pace. Instead, he moved forward. He would later tell investigators that something compelled him to follow, a curiosity that overrode his fear. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Whatever he had just seen, it was real, and it was in front of him. He stayed on the trail for another 100 feet, then stepped off into the palmetto. The creature had left disturbed vegetation, bent fronds showing the direction of travel. The path was unmistakable. Something large had pushed through here, and recently. Brian kept his phone raised, recording continuously now. The footage shows his hands shaking, the image bouncing with each step. The palmetto grew thicker off trail, the stiff fronds reaching waist-high. They scraped against his pants and grabbed at his boots. Progress was slow. He had to push through with his free hand while keeping the camera up with his right. Sweat began to form on his forehead, despite the moderate temperature. The exertion combined with adrenaline made his breathing heavier. He tracked the disturbances for roughly 300 feet, moving deeper into an area where the pines grew denser and the understory thickened with saw palmetto and gallberry. The canopy blocked much of the afternoon sun. Shadows stretched across the forest floor. The temperature felt cooler here, away from direct sunlight. His video timestamp showed 2:17 p.m. when he stopped again. Something had changed in the forest. The usual sounds, the distant birds and rustling of small animals, had ceased completely. Brian panned his camera slowly from left to right. The recording captured his breathing, faster now, and the crunch of dry pine needles under his boots. He stood completely still, listening. Nothing. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Movement flickered in his peripheral vision. He spun left, camera following. The creature stood 80 feet away, partially obscured by a dead pine. But it was facing him now. The footage shows a clear frontal view for nearly 8 seconds. The body was broader than any human, the chest barrel-shaped and covered in dark hair that appeared lighter around the face. The arms hung at its sides, hands visible, each finger clearly defined. The hands looked almost human in structure, but larger, much larger. Each hand appeared to be at least 12 inches long. The face stared directly at the camera. The eyes were dark, sunken beneath that heavy brow ridge. Brian froze. The creature did not move. It simply watched him, standing perfectly still in a way that felt deliberate, patient. Then it stepped out from behind the tree. The full height became apparent. Brian's angle, shooting slightly upward, confirmed this thing stood well over 7 feet tall. The legs were thick, powerful, built for strength rather than speed. Or so Brian thought. It took 2 steps forward, closing the distance to about 70 feet. Each step was measured, controlled. Brian's camera lowered slightly, his arm wavering. The footage becomes less steady. His hands were shaking more now. The creature took another step. Brian backed up. His boot caught on something, a root or vine hidden under the pine needles, and the camera jerked as he caught himself. He stumbled but did not fall. When he raised the phone again, the creature had moved. It was now 50 feet away. It had covered 20 feet in the second or two when Brian's camera was down. The speed was wrong. Something that large should not be able to move that quickly, that quietly. The recording shows Brian turning and walking quickly back the way he came. He kept the camera pointed behind him, over his shoulder. The creature followed. It matched his pace, maintaining the 50-foot distance. The spacing felt intentional, not close enough to be an immediate threat, but close enough to maintain pressure. Brian increased his speed. The creature did the same. Its movements remained smooth, efficient. The footage captured nearly 2 minutes of this pursuit. The creature never closed the gap further, but it never fell behind. It walked with the same steady, powerful stride. Its head remained fixed on Brian, tracking his movement through the forest. The eyes never left him. Brian glanced forward to navigate, then back to check the creature's position. Each time he looked back, it was still there, still maintaining that exact distance. The precision felt wrong. Animals did not behave this way. They either attacked or they fled. This was something else entirely. Brian reached the area where he first left the trail. He scrambled up onto the path, nearly dropping his phone. The footage shows dirt and vegetation, then the trail ahead as he turned to run. He looked back one more time. The creature stood at the edge of the trail, 40 feet away now. It had stopped moving. Brian ran. The recording went dark as he shoved the phone in his pocket, but the audio continued. His breathing came in gasps, his footsteps pounding on the hard-packed sand trail. The audio captured something else. A sound that started low, almost a rumble, then rose in pitch. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, unlike anything in the Florida wilderness. Not a bear, not a panther, not any known animal. The vocalization seemed to come from multiple directions, echoing through the pines. Brian's running footsteps stuttered, slowed. The camera came back out of his pocket. The footage shows the trail ahead, empty. Brian turned in a full circle, nothing visible in any direction. He moved forward again, no longer running but walking fast. His breathing had settled slightly. The trail curved ahead, returning toward the prairie. Brian checked behind him every few seconds. The forest remained empty, but something felt wrong. He later described it as a pressure, a sense of being watched from all sides. The footage shows him scanning the tree line continuously. At 2:31 p.m., roughly 14 minutes after the initial sighting, he was approximately half a mile from his vehicle. A crack echoed through the forest. The sound was sharp, loud like a gunshot. Brian spun toward the sound. His camera captured a pine branch, easily 6 inches in diameter, falling to the trail 30 feet ahead. It hit the ground with a heavy thud that sent up dust. The branch had broken cleanly, snapped near the trunk. There was no wind. The air was still. Pine branches did not simply break on their own. Brian approached slowly, his footsteps hesitant. The footage shows him looking up into the canopy. The tree where the branch had broken stood at least 40 feet tall. Nothing visible in the upper branches. No movement? He stepped around the branch and continued. His pace had slowed considerably now. He checked the forest on both sides constantly. 20 feet later, another crack. This time from the right side of the trail. Another branch, this one even larger, perhaps 8 inches across. It crashed through the understory, breaking smaller branches on its way down. It landed 15 feet from where Brian stood. The impact shook the ground slightly. Brian could feel it through his boots. He stopped walking completely. His breathing was audible on the recording now, coming in short, quick bursts. He raised his camera, filming the forest on both sides. The footage shows dense vegetation, shadows between the trees. The palmetto was too thick to see more than 20 feet in most directions. He called out, asking if anyone was there. His voice carried through the quiet forest, sounding small and uncertain. No response came, not a sound. He waited for perhaps 15 seconds, the camera still rolling. Nothing. He started moving again, faster now. His walk was almost a jog. The trail straightened ahead, offering a clear view for perhaps 100 feet. Brian focused on that distant section, on reaching open ground. If he could get back to the prairie, to the trailhead, he would be safe. The parking area felt impossibly far away now, though it was less than half a mile. The third branch came from directly overhead. The crack was louder, sharper. It sounded closer. Brian looked up just as it fell. The footage captured his dive to the side, the camera swinging wildly. Sky, trees, ground, all blurred together. He hit the ground hard, landing on his left side. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. The phone flew from his hand, tumbling through the air. It landed in the palmetto, camera facing the trail. The branch, nearly 8 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh, slammed into the trail where he had been standing. The impact sent up a cloud of dust and pine needles. If Brian had not moved, if he had been even a second slower, the branch would have struck him directly. The phone landed in the palmetto, camera facing the trail. The angle showed Brian on his hands and knees, scrambling to his feet. He looked up into the canopy, then all around. His mouth moved, words inaudible on the recording. He stepped toward where the phone lay, reaching down. Before he could grab it, a rock struck the ground 3 feet from the phone. The rock hit with force, embedding itself slightly in the soft sand. Then another, landing between Brian and the device. The rocks were substantial, each the size of a softball. They came from the right side of the trail. Brian jerked back, stumbling. A third rock hit closer to the phone, then a fourth. They formed a pattern, a line across the trail. Brian changed direction, moving left, circling to reach his phone from a different angle. More rocks pelted the trail, 5 more in rapid succession. They fell with precision, each one landing exactly where Brian was trying to move. They formed a line, as if thrown deliberately to block his path. The spacing was too exact to be random. Brian stopped. He stared in the direction the rocks were coming from. The footage, from its position in the undergrowth, captured his profile. His body language showed tension, hands raised slightly in front of him. Defensive, he took a step back, then another. His head turned slowly, scanning the tree line, looking for the source. Something massive moved through the palmetto on the right side of the trail. The vegetation shook violently, fronds bending and breaking. Something large was pushing through, and it was not being careful about stealth anymore. The sound grew louder, closer. Brian turned to run. The footage captured his legs as he passed the phone, sprinting down the trail. His boots kicked up sand with each stride. The sounds of breaking vegetation grew louder. Whatever was in the forest was moving fast, parallel to the trail. The palmetto rattled and shook along a 30-foot section. Brian's footsteps faded slightly as he got further from the phone. His breathing was ragged, panicked. The sound of breaking branches continued, getting closer to the camera's position. The entire understory seemed to be moving. Then it appeared. The creature stepped out of the palmetto 20 feet from where the phone lay. The angle captured it from roughly waist height. The massive legs, trunk-like and covered in dark hair. Each leg was thicker than any human thigh, the muscles visible even through the hair as it moved. The arms hanging forward slightly, the hands flexed, fingers spreading and closing. It turned its head, looking down the trail in the direction Brian had gone. The face was fully visible for nearly 4 seconds, heavy brow ridge casting shadows over the eyes, deep-set eyes that reflected light slightly, giving them an almost luminous quality. Flat nose with large nostrils that flared as it breathed. The mouth was closed, the jaw prominent and strong. Hair covered most of the face, but thinned around the eyes and mouth, revealing dark skin underneath. The expression was not aggressive, but focused, intelligent. The eyes showed awareness, calculation. The creature took 3 steps onto the trail, each footfall visible in the frame. The feet were enormous, easily 18 inches long, wider than a human foot. The toes splayed out with each step, gripping the sand. 5 toes were clearly visible on the left foot as it lifted. The foot flexed naturally, the arch visible. These were not bear paws, not costume pieces. The movement was too natural, too complex. The creature paused in the middle of the trail, turned its head back toward the camera for just a moment. The eyes seemed to look directly at the lens. Then it looked down the trail again, toward where Brian had disappeared. It dropped into a forward stance, weight shifting onto the balls of its feet. The knees bent slightly. The arms came up, hands positioned forward. Then it ran. The speed was shocking. The creature covered ground faster than seemed possible for something so large. Its gait was not quite human, the stride too long, each step covering nearly 6 feet. The arm swing was too pronounced, the arms pumping with tremendous force. But it was clearly bipedal running, not the quadrupedal gallop of a bear. The power in each stride was visible in how its feet struck the ground, sending up small clouds of sand. Within 3 seconds, it had disappeared around the curve in the trail. The sound of its footfalls continued for several seconds more, heavy thuds that faded into the distance. The forest fell silent again. The phone continued recording from its position in the palmetto, showing only the empty trail and the rocks scattered across the sand. Small clouds of dust still hung in the air where the creature had run. 43 seconds later, a scream cut through the forest. It was human, Brian's voice coming from perhaps 200 feet away. The scream was raw, primal, filled with terror and pain. It lasted 2 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Impact sounds followed, something heavy hitting the ground. A grunt, distinctly human. More sounds of struggle, breaking vegetation, thrashing, then silence again. Complete silence. The phone recorded nothing but that silence for nearly 30 seconds. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. The forest held its breath. Movement appeared at the edge of the frame. Brian came into view, crawling on the trail. He was bleeding from his forehead, blood running down the left side of his face. The cut was deep, possibly from hitting the ground or a rock. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, the fabric hanging loose. Scratches covered his exposed shoulder, some deep enough to bleed. He crawled toward the phone, each movement showing pain. His left arm dragged slightly, not moving correctly. The shoulder hung at an odd angle, dislocated. He reached the phone, grabbed it with his right hand. His fingers were shaking, barely able to grip. The camera swung up, showing his face for just a moment. The blood, the wide eyes, the dirt caked on his right cheek. His mouth was open, breathing hard. Then the footage went dark as he pulled the phone close to his chest, curling around it protectively. The audio continued. Brian's breathing was ragged, gasping. Each breath sounded painful, catching in his throat. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Not running now. Walking. Slow. Each footfall was distinct, spaced several feet apart. They stopped close, very close, perhaps 3 feet from where Brian lay. A new sound emerged, a breathing that was not Brian's. Deeper, slower, resonating. It came from directly above the microphone. Something was standing over him. The breathing was steady, controlled. Whatever stood there was not winded from the chase. Brian's breathing stopped as if he was holding his breath, trying to be completely still. The other breathing continued, a sniffing sound, like an animal investigating something. Long inhalations, processing scent. This continued for nearly 20 seconds. Each second must have felt like an eternity for Brian, lying there wounded with something massive standing over him. A low sound, almost a grunt, came from whatever was standing above Brian. The tone was neither aggressive nor curious. It sounded almost satisfied, confirmatory. Then the heavy footsteps again, moving away. Each step clearly audible. They grew fainter, but did not hurry. The creature was walking, not running. The footsteps stopped somewhere in the distance, still close enough to hear, perhaps 40 feet away. Brian's breathing resumed, sharp and quick, hyperventilating. He did not move. The audio captured him lying there for another minute, maybe longer. His breathing slowly steadied, though it remained fast. Finally, movement, fabric rustling, the sound of him sitting up, a groan of pain, his voice barely a whisper, words unclear. Could have been prayer, could have been nothing. The camera came back up, pointing ahead. The footage showed the trail, empty now. Brian panned right, then left. Nothing visible. He struggled to his feet, the camera shaking violently. Getting up took nearly 10 seconds. Each movement was agony. His left ankle gave out the first time he tried to stand, and he dropped back to one knee with a gasp. On the second attempt, he made it upright, but could not put full weight on the left leg. He started moving, limping badly. His left leg was not working properly. The ankle was either badly sprained or broken. Each step came with a grunt of pain. The camera pointed down at the trail, showing his boots and the sand passing beneath. Blood dripped from his forehead, leaving dark spots on the sand. He moved perhaps 30 feet, each step slower than the last. Then he stopped. He raised the camera again. The creature stood in the trail ahead. The distance was hard to judge from the footage, but investigators later estimated roughly 60 feet based on known trail features visible in the frame. It faced Brian directly, standing in the center of the trail. The lighting was better here, the canopy thinner. Late afternoon sun filtered through, illuminating the creature clearly. The footage captured details that had been obscured in shadows before. The massive shoulders, the broad chest rising and falling with breath. The arms, so much longer than human proportions, hanging relaxed at its sides. The face, mostly hair-covered, but the eyes visible. Dark eyes, watching. Not black like a bear's eyes, but dark brown, almost human in color. The creature's chest moved with its breathing, slow and steady. It shifted its weight from one foot to the other, a subtle movement, but distinctly visible. It did not advance. It simply stood there, blocking the trail, watching Brian with what could only be described as curiosity. Brian took a step backward. His injured leg nearly buckled, but he caught himself. The creature did not react. Its head remained level, eyes fixed on Brian. Another step back. Brian's breathing was loud on the audio, each breath catching with pain. Still no movement from the creature. It waited. Brian turned and began moving away, faster now despite the limp. His body was running on pure adrenaline, overriding the pain signals. He kept the camera pointed behind him. The creature remained where it stood, watching him retreat. Its posture was relaxed, non-threatening. It made no move to follow. Brian covered roughly 40 feet, each step visible in the shaky footage. He fell once, going down hard on his right knee. The camera caught the impact, then sky as he nearly dropped the phone. He recovered, got back up, kept moving. When he glanced back once more, the creature was gone. The trail stood empty. No movement in the vegetation, no sound. It had simply disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. The remainder of the footage showed Brian's painful journey back to the trailhead. He fell twice more, the camera capturing the ground, then sky, then the trail again as he recovered. He never stopped checking behind him. The forest remained quiet, no signs of pursuit. At 2:49 p.m., he reached the parking area. His vehicle was the only one there. The footage showed him fumbling with his keys, dropping them once before getting the door open. The recording ended as he collapsed into the driver's seat. Brian drove directly to Advent Health Waterman in Tavares, 35 miles from the forest. Medical records show he arrived at 3:27 p.m. with lacerations to his scalp requiring 12 stitches, a dislocated left shoulder, severe bruising across his back and left side, and a sprained left ankle. The attending physician documented Brian's account of being attacked by an unknown animal while hiking. Brian turned over his phone to Tavares Police Department that evening. The footage, totaling 31 minutes and 47 seconds, underwent analysis by 3 separate wildlife experts. All confirmed the subject in the video was not a bear, not a person in a costume, and not any known animal in Florida. The proportions, movement patterns, and physical characteristics did not match any documented species. Frame-by-frame analysis of the clearest shots showed details impossible to fabricate with 2025 consumer technology, including individual hair movement, muscle definition beneath the hair, and micro-expressions in the facial features. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission investigated the location 3 days after the incident. Officers found disturbed vegetation consistent with Brian's account, broken branches at the reported locations, and impressions in soft ground near the trail. One clear track measured 17 inches long and 9 inches across at the widest point. Casting was attempted, but the ground conditions produced only a partial mold. The investigation report concluded that Brian had encountered something in Ocala National Forest, but could not determine what species. Brian Phillips recovered from his physical injuries within 8 weeks. He has refused all media requests and will not disclose the exact trail location beyond the general area of Farlow's Prairie. In his single statement to investigators, he described the moment the creature stood over him as the most terrifying experience of his life, not because of what it did, but because of what it chose not to do. The footage remains the clearest, most detailed Bigfoot evidence ever captured in Florida, and the only documented case of physical contact with injuries requiring medical treatment. In June 2001, Jim Mills was leading a youth group through California's Marble Mountain Wilderness. The group was backpacking through remote ridges and thick conifer forests when they discovered a series of bizarre structures. Stick formations and cleared areas made from snapped branches suggested something large and powerful had been using this spot repeatedly. These weren't bear dens or anything human-made that Mills had ever seen before. And that afternoon, while hiking along a ridge, Mills spotted it. A figure standing upright in the distance, covered in dark hair, watching them. The creature's movement was unlike anything they'd witnessed. Long strides with arms that seemed way too long for any human. It would pause, shift its weight, and look directly at the group before slowly disappearing behind a stand of trees. The whole encounter lasted several minutes, and Mills managed to capture it on his handheld camcorder. The footage has been analyzed extensively by researchers and cryptozoologists. They said that what makes this footage especially compelling is the terrain. Could a human make those smooth, fluid movements in such dense undergrowth and uneven ground? Critics argue the distance, video quality, and lighting could create optical illusions that exaggerate size and movement. Skeptics suggest Mills' group might have encountered a bear standing on its hind legs or misinterpreted shadows and silhouettes in the forest. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.